All right, welcome back. I'm so excited because this is a repeat guest. But this funny thing, I was actually going like through my mind of thinking about this, and I always joke that you could not pay me to go back and listen to like my really early episodes. And so, a fellow podcaster, fellow author, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm so excited to welcome you back to the show, Rebecca George. Thanks for being.
Oh, friend. Yes, thanks for having me. I'm so honored to be back. And I totally get what you're saying. I feel the exact same way about my show. I always keep those episodes. I'm a coach as well, and so I love sharing with my clients like it it is part of the journey to
Hmm.
just practice and get good at something. And so I leave all of those early episodes up there as evidence that we grow over time, we find our voice, all of those things. So I totally get that.
100%. Yes. I'm always like, be brave enough to suck at something new. Pretty much
That's right. That's
is my
exactly right.
one
I
of my
love it.
mottos. I love it. I seriously remember uh writing an email to you, like apologize. I think too, I totally remember being like just really off. I feel like that when I had you on, and
Mm.
I was like so excited because I had this opportunity to interview an author, and I was so excited about
Oh,
your first book that
yeah.
was coming out and everything. And I'm like, oh, I blew that. Like I felt
Oh my goodness. Well, if it makes you feel
bad.
better, that's not at all what I remember. So,
I love it. Well, I have so grown. Absolutely. God has been refining and it's live bold movement, right? He's been
yeah.
working on my own boldness and confidence in just sharing
Yeah.
stories and, being able to then bring people on to share theirs. So, yes, I'm
Yeah.
so excited obviously to get into the book and the title. I'm going to read this. You're Not Too Late, Trusting God's Timing in a Hurry Up World. I resonate with this so
Mm.
deeply. So yes, his
Yeah.
timing is so perfect that he brought this. And but I would love for you just to share a little bit of your journey leading up to writing this and what you're doing now as
Yeah.
a coach and all the things. So
Yeah, totally. Well, I loved our conversation about my first book, and it was my first book, Do the Thing, Gospel Centered Goals, Gumption, and Grace for the Go Getter Girl. That conversation was really a fun conversation to have, right? Of
yeah.
like, okay, what are the gifts and talents God's given you, and how are you using them to grow his kingdom, and all those things. Like it was like the rah book, you
Yes.
know? And
Yes.
so it was a fun book to write, it was a fun book to market. And I sensed as I continued praying about what was next, I had a two-book contract. So there was one that came behind Do the Thing that became You're Not Too Late. And I just started praying, like, Lord, what would you have me to write about next? And this thread of longing kept coming up for me. And honestly, Tierney, in the beginning, I thought it might be a book on singleness. I got married later in my 20s. I had been a bridesmaid 12 times when I married my husband, Dustin. I had planned all the bachelorette parties and baby showers and all of that. And I felt like I had a lot to say to single women later in life. We're getting married later in life. So I felt like, ooh, a publisher would probably like that because it meets a unique need and whatever. And the more I kept praying about it and talking to other women in my life, I kept realizing that this was so much bigger than singleness.
Mm,
Because when I married Dustin, the reality is longing for Rebecca didn't end in that moment. It just started to look different.
yeah.
Right. And so, whether it is a relational longing to reconcile a relationship, to get married, to become a grandparent, it can look a million different ways, or a vocational longing to start a business, to make a career change, to get involved in your local church or in an organization that you're passionate about. There's so many ways that this can look in our lives, but I think the challenges are pretty similar. It's
Mhm.
things like despair over like, gosh, is God ever going to provide this? It's doubt. It's resentment over watching so many other people get to experience what you want and the envy and comparison that comes along with that.
Mhm.
So it looks similar in our hearts when we experience it. And so I felt really passionate about backing up and going, okay, what have been my greatest challenges, my sin struggles, the places where I've gotten really tripped up in my own longing, and what's God shown me in that, and what might be useful to other people. So that's like the 30,000-foot view of the journey.
Yes. Oh, and it is a journey. I love how you take these concepts though and truly then bring them back to the root sin that's there
Yeah.
in our spirit and or just really in our humanness, right? In our fleshly
Yeah.
desires, and that we truly can bring it's okay. Like God already knows we're longing for these things.
That's
Like
right.
there's
Yeah.
desires in our heart that He put there, but
Yeah.
He also didn't tell us to put our own timestamp on them, right?
Yeah.
And I love
Yeah.
because we're in totally different journeys in motherhood and marriage and things like where we're at and what we're longing for.
Yeah.
And I resonate so deeply with this
Mhm.
in where, because I have kids now in high school and I'm
Yeah.
thinking about them being gone. And I'm like, but we're not where I thought we were going to be when my kids are graduating
Yeah.
and going into high school, going, I'm like, and so it doesn't matter where you're at. Like you said, it truly is just that journey as a woman, as a follower of
Yeah.
Jesus. And it's so beautiful that you took that back to what God says about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would love for you to share a little bit because each chapter kind of breaks down a journey,
Mhm.
right? Which
Yeah.
is a shift from
Totally.
essentially the sin to what scripture says, right? So, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love for you to share a little bit more about it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think the important distinction that I would want to start with there is there's a little bit of a cycle that happens in us when we long for things. And I describe it in kind of three pieces. Two of them, the great news, two of them aren't sin. So let's like quickly walk through it. The first one is we look at something. We kind of notice as we look to the right or to the left, oh, I desire to have children. And three of my best friends have gotten pregnant in the last 6 months. I
Mm,
notice that, right?
yeah.
That's not sin. I look around, I notice other people's lives. Then I experience longing for that. It probably already exists in my heart, but when it bumps up against somebody else's blessing, that
Mm,
often kind of trips our hearts up. That also is not sin. That's part of living in a broken world and navigating friendship and community and figuring out how to do that in a season of waiting. The third piece is where we get really tripped up. So we look, we experience longing, and then we linger. And that is
mm,
really where our hearts get tripped up and we kind of ruminate on, okay, well, she got to experience that before I did. And I've been waiting longer than her. And I'm really involved in my local church and I'm discipling people and I'm doing all these great things for the Lord. And I don't even see her doing that over here. And she met the guy before I did. And all of those things that we can kind of play games with in our hearts that lead us to doubt, that lead us to resentment and bitterness over our lives. And what I think happens is we miss God's hand in how he is at work in our current season. And so yeah, every chapter of You're Not Too Late kind of is this from X to Y. So
mhm,
there's from despair to joy. What does it look like to experience biblical joy? And guess what? It's not happiness. And we say that a lot, but
mhm.
oftentimes we tie the things we want to like, oh, I'll experience joy when I fill in the blank
Yep.
versus recognizing like my true joy does not at all hinge upon the circumstances of my life,
Mhm.
but on the character of God. And as I abide in him, what comes out of me, what happens in me is his joy. And so great news is it doesn't hinge on me getting the thing I want. And so that's despair to joy. There's doubt to hope. There's isolation to community. Many times when we're struggling with the longing, we love to believe that nobody else understands what we feel.
Mhm.
And that can be a really easy wall to put up in friendship and in community and even, among our family and things as we're navigating that longing. But we so miss out on the community that God has wired us for. And we need it. Our hearts need it, especially when we're longing and
Mhm.
waiting for something. And so I'm sure listeners are listening and probably thinking of even other struggles in their own life that maybe would resonate with this area of longing. But I chose 10. I could have written about many more, but my publisher
Yep.
and I kind of whittled it down to 10 main
Yep.
areas of struggle. And yeah, we can dig into any and all of that, but those are a few of the things that I think are pretty common.
Yeah, I love it. I really think it's important I mean, every single one of these are important shifts, but definitely when you said the isolation to community, that just spoke right to my heart because that's what
Yeah.
we're doing is building community and, bringing women together and it stems from the enemy's tactic of trying to keep me
Yes.
isolated. And mine is a mental health journey, right? That was, there's so much
Mhm.
shame involved in that. And I think one of the biggest contributors to making that shift is our own vulnerability and
Yeah.
having the courage and the boldness and just to be able to share our own stories vulnerably. So is I would love if there's like a particular story that sticks out for you in
Mhm.
shifting from isolation to community and how you walked that journey.
Yeah, totally. I think it's huge. Um, I would say probably one of the more recent seasons of that for me was I married my husband in 2019. And in that season of life, he was, let me back up. I'll say that again. It's 5 o'clock. um,
No worries.
One of the most recent, I think, examples of that for me, I married my husband in 2019. He's a lead pastor. He
Mhm.
was pastoring a church over 500 miles away from
Wow.
my friends and family and where I was living at the time. We met actually when he lived here in East Tennessee, where we live now.
Mhm.
But so when I married him, I moved away from everything that was comfortable, familiar
Mhm.
for me in every domain of my life, my church family, my friends, my family. And so I kind of got used to feeling isolated because not only was I moving to a town of 12,000 people, that's isolating. Not only was I all of a sudden a pastor's wife and a lead pastor's wife, that's isolating.
Mhm.
But we got married about 10 months before COVID.
Yeah.
So, very, very quickly into not only marriage, not only a move, not only becoming a pastor's wife, we walked into a global pandemic. And so,
Mhm.
for many, many years, that was just kind of my reality, And so I had to work really hard to pursue community. And I just kind of settled for the fact that, like, well, I'm always going to live far away from people who do what I do because there aren't any of us in Southern Mississippi. And so if I'm going to have community, I have to go to conferences. I have to Marco Polo long distance friends and all. So I like
Yeah.
had the right things built around me. But I actually found myself at a conference several years ago, went to a podcasting conference.
Mhm.
And you know how it is. Like we go to events like that and we go to learn and we sit and hear great sessions and it was a great conference. However, what I found to be the most valuable to me was this little group of women kind of connected throughout the day. Nobody had dinner plans. And so we all went to this Mexican restaurant that was close by. And I remember looking around that table. We sat and talked for almost 4 hours, left at like midnight that night.
Yeah.
And I remember looking around at the table and then getting back in my car on the way to the hotel. And I thought, like, that is what I need. That is what I need in my everyday life. And we actually, many of them we're still really close. And God just had us all in the same room at the same time for a purpose, which was so
Yeah.
sweet. But God actually used that. About Camp for Creatives that I started here in East Tennessee. Um, it was that night that I sat back and thought, like, man, I want to create this for women who do what we do, who write, who speak, who have podcasts. And I want to have a space where like comparison doesn't exist, competition doesn't exist. And so I'm always maybe to the extreme pressing back against a lot of those things because man, I just don't think we're wired for it. I think technology has made um, envy and comparison such easy targets for the enemy.
Mhm.
And so I think in my own journey from isolation to community, it has been a like ruthless pushing back on a lot of those things
Mhm.
because I just don't want to miss how God's at work in my vocational calling and the longing that accompanies that.
Mhm.
I want to walk alongside other women in theirs and I want to be a cheerleader for other people coming behind me and in
Mhm.
order to do that, I've got to be pretty intolerant of things like comparison and envy.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so, yeah, that was a little bit of a word salad about community, but
Oh,
hopefully that's
so
helpful.
yes, so powerful. And yeah, I agree completely. And I think what was kind of popping in my head too is I think to the enemy, not only in envy and comparison of others, but then also wants to to really get into the self-reliance, right? When we're isolated,
Yes.
we can be like, I got this, right?
Yeah.
Totally. I don't
Yeah.
need even other people, but even God,
Yes.
if we're doing that too, and the enemy just has a heyday with that. But when we can get in those safe spaces, I love that God like just placed you all in that room. And there's just such a difference when it truly is kingdom community where there isn't
Yeah.
the competition and you just don't have that, and you can look around and be like, I want you to win just as much as that.
Yes.
And oh, it's such a beautiful thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you for cultivating that. Thank you for being part of
Yes.
it and just for sharing that because ladies, yeah, it's out
We
there.
need each
It
other. Yeah.
truly is. And let me speak from experience. If you can't find it, maybe you're supposed to be creating it.
Amen.
And
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
let
And
me tell you,
we can sit around
yeah.
and gripe all day long about the struggles of isolation, but sometimes we have to be the one to recognize like, I'm not the only one that feels this way. And so maybe, yeah, maybe I'm supposed to do something about it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, he kind of had me kicking and screaming. I thought I was like, "Oh, I know exactly what I need. Let me go look around and find it." And he's like, "No, you're supposed to create that." And oh, I laughed. I was like, "Yeah, no, I don't do that." So,
Yeah,
but yes, yes, he will definitely shape you through that process for sure.
totally.
Yep. And obviously shape you through writing a book. I think we were kind of chatting about that before I even hit record, how it's literally
Yeah.
putting something like this out into the world. That's an ultimate vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And because you're sharing so much of your own story through it. Yeah, I would love for you just to speak a little bit on that, just that writing process and
Mhm.
what it takes and what you go through to put
Yeah.
something like this out into the world.
Yeah, totally. This felt entirely different than my first book in
Mm.
in practice of what it was like to write it. It took me 10 years to get a book deal for my first book. And so pause, my dog is barking. I'm so
Hey,
sorry. I don't know if you can hear him.
very lightly.
So
Doesn't, but
sorry.
no worries at all. Well, I literally had to have a neighbor shut off. There was crazy music. He's outside working on a car.
Oh,
Right
lovely.
before I text my husband, I'm
Yeah.
like, can you?
It's about like my neighbor getting a tree cut down a few weeks ago when I had like a whole day of
Yeah.
podcasts. It was a nightmare. Okay, I
Yep.
think we're good. Okay.
I feel like the mic doesn't even pick that stuff up
I
anymore.
know. I
And I
never
truly
know.
like,
So
I'm like, you know what? It's real life. I've had kids
that's
come
right.
in and interrupt me. I have, like you said, it's always when you start a podcast and you're about to have like some profound conversation that the landscapers show up and start cutting things
Oh,
out.
yeah.
So we just say,
We
nope,
just figured it out.
nope.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
keep going.
Okay. So I'll just do a quick pause and then I'll just jump back in. Um, yeah, Tierney, this felt completely different in the writing process for me than it did book one. Book one, as we talked about, was kind of the like raw kind of message, which was so fun to write. It took me a really long time to get my book deal for that book. And so by the time it got to the finish line, it just felt like, man, I gave a decade of my life to this book, but it was actually pretty easy to write. What was interesting about You're Not Too Late is it was actually coming out of me faster
Mm,
than I could have ever expected. But what was different to me was, just discerning, like, what the world needed to know versus what of that did I need to get out of me for me.
hmm
So there was a lot of conversation between me and the Lord of like, okay, is that the best story to illustrate that? Or did I have to write that to totally scrap it just because God wanted to heal something for me
hmm
personally?
Yep.
And that actually happened a couple of times in the writing process where I would feel really good about a story and then the Lord would wake me up in the middle of the night and just kind of I would have this sense of like that's not the story. You need to scrap it and here's what needs to go at the
Mm.
front of that chapter. And so yeah, I think it was a lot of that. This book was as much for me as it was for my reader.
hmm
And my reader is every woman I know. Every woman I know feels too late for her life in some way.
hmm
And so the input of that was also interesting as I was writing and just talking about, well, I'm writing this book about waiting and everyone would kind of have their own version of how that resonated with them.
hmm
And so there were a lot of moments along the way where I'd be on a walk with a friend and the Lord would give me something. And so I ended up writing the first draft of the book in Google Docs because I always wanted it to be easy for me to just jot something down no matter where I was
Mm.
because I saw it everywhere, you
Yeah.
know? So it was a really cool journey with the Lord to write this one. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
fun.
I love that he just gave you those confirmations just over and over.
Yeah.
Like, so beautiful. Yes. So please share where people can get their hands on this book and just connect with you because, yeah, there's so much more to come. I know. And we are definitely kindred spirits in wanting to
Yes.
help other people get their messages out into the world. Right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, totally. Well, I'm the most active over on Instagram. My handle is Rebecca George Author. And so you can definitely find me there. I have a podcast called Radical Radiance where we release episodes weekly that just encourage women and what it looks like to radiate the heart of Christ and all that they do.
mhm.
And then you can grab the book anywhere you like to buy books. It's the full title is You're Not Too Late, Trusting God's Timing in a Hurry Up World. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian Book, all the places. And I would love to connect with you.
Yes, amazing. Well, we'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes so everybody can get that. And yeah, just if you get your hands on this book and read it and have feedback, like reach out. Like that is so
Yeah.
just yeah, it's just so amazing when an author can get that feedback and see some of the impact,
Yeah.
that it's making. So that's a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for being on here and sharing a little bit about it. And I can't wait to read the whole thing because I know this is something that I need. Absolutely. And I always just love to ask one last question of everybody at the end, and that is, what does living bold mean to you?
Oh man. I think living bold to me means obedience regardless of the cost.
Mm,
That's what's coming to mind. And that can show up in a million different ways, but it is faithfully obeying and taking that next step, whether it feels vulnerable, scary, have doubt about it, I'm scared to do it. Regardless of the cost, it's obeying the Lord.
mm. So good. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I can't wait to get it out to the community and just share more about this book. It's gonna
Thanks,
impact
friend.
a lot of lives. So thank you.